Card Games TV Podcast. Unique play style, or being unique, is one of the things that I noticed that doesn't happen a lot in current modern day card games. I'll say, let me see, when can I quantify it? I think after 2011 or something like that is when players really stopped playing unique decks. Where what I'm trying to say is the majority of players used to try to play things unique and different, right? After a while, playing the same thing as everybody else, and playing mirror matches and all that stuff, playing meta, quote unquote, the best decks, that became more and more of a thing. And then of course card games like Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, because I'm coming from the point of view of Yu-Gi-Oh, most of the card games just immediately start off with the whole archetype idea. But Yu-Gi-Oh originally started off with generic stuff. And then over time, over a couple of sets, they started introducing the idea of archetypes, pre-built decks and strategies and cards that automatically had synergy just because they had the same name in their in their cards, or they just they just had synergy. Like certain cards were obvious that you can use them with other cards and get certain results, and that started becoming popular. And it made sense because for players who were new or not that good at the game, it makes sense to play archetypes and have stuff pre-built that you can buy and play and get started in the game. And it was useful because most of us older players, veteran players, we will use archetypes to get people into card games, right? We'll show them the archetypes and use it as a gateway to the game. But ultimately what we wanted, this is what we used to want, ultimately what we wanted was for them to learn the game through the archetypes and then start diversifying, right? Start creating their own decks and start doing their own thing. So we expected their individuality, the fact that they're a different person than you, right? To come out in the game, right? To be reflected in the play style. Because if you gave somebody a aggro deck, right, an aggro archetype, but later on it turns out that they prefer control or combo or something similar to that, or they just like a nice little stall strategy, like Hatchiak or something like that, and they just, or Bulma or something, and they just like, or even Janemba Mill, like they just prefer to stall, right, block, negate, and then just mill their opponent out, and that's their play style. But you started them off with like some type of like Broly BR or something, and try to teach them how to OTK on turn 2 or some shit like that, right? That's how you started them off. But it eventually they came to their own and found what best suits them, what they prefer, which is always a good thing. It's the same thing as like when you're raising kids, you want to show them different ways to do stuff, right? Show them different interests, right? Show them, oh look, this is a doctor, oh look, this is a firefighter, look, this is the president of the United States of America, stuff like that, right? And show them the possibilities of what they could be, and then it's up to them ultimately, right, to choose their destiny. But you gotta let them know what their options are. Most people nowadays, that's not the case. That's part of the problem with less uniqueness, because too many people are not trying to show that there's different options out there. Like one of the things I hear a lot from players is the idea that Soul Striker is the only blue leader worth playing, and it's like, it's a good leader, yes, but it's the kind of leader that I would give a brand new player to use to get them into the idea of that type of level of power, because it's like it makes the game easy. And then I will slowly show them other leaders and get them used to those types of leaders, because I want them to know that there's more than one type of leader. Not every leader untaps energy every time it attacks. That's not a common thing, and I don't want them to think that that's common, that that's normal to be untapping energy. I want them to understand that that's special, that's unique. And because most players are not sharing uniqueness and not trying to show that there's different ways to play the game, you get a lot of the same stuff, right? You get a lot of people playing the same things. And after a while, it becomes degenerate. And after a while, people start complaining like, you know what, this needs to get banned, that needs to get banned for the health of the game, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, but the true health of the game is diversity, is uniqueness. It's everybody trying different things. The encouragement that trying things differently, playing differently is okay. As opposed to they're like, nah, you got to play this specific way. This is the best way to play, blah, blah, blah. And, you get this whole elitist scenario where, everybody tries to create a status quo. And a lot of times they use the term meta to refer to that, to the idea like this is the standard. This is the way you have to play, meta. And then they also try to imply that meta is the best way to play. And it's like, nah, because that concept is similar to like the idea of a government, right? It's like, oh, communism is the best way, or democracy, or something similar to that. You get the point. Like there's a certain system that's the best system. It's like, oh, no, it depends on the group. It depends on the people, which system is the best, and that's one of the things you get with the idea of like meta. And some people get meta and formats confused. They tend to mix it. Format tends to be more in general. In general, with the card pools we have, these are the options, right? These are the things you could do, right? This is essentially your limitations, right? While meta is the choices you choose and some of the options within the format that you choose. So but sometimes people get meta and format confused and think that's one and the same when it's not. Meta is within a format, right? That's why if we had rotations and had it where we had a certain type of, unison block format or something, and you only can play stuff from the unison block, and you can't play from other blocks, then, the meta will be shaped, will be different in every rotation. Every rotation, the meta will be different, right? Now, formats, of course, they change, but they change based off of the card pool. If the card pool doesn't change for a long time, then the format is the same. Like the format hasn't changed, right? The meta within the format can change, where people, start changing things up and like, all right, you know what? I want to play a different type of leader because I'm bored of playing the same decks. And that's the difference between a format and a meta. A meta is largely based off of deck types and decks, right? Wow, really? While it's nighttime and there's like a duck on a wall watching me. That's some creepy shit. All right, so like I said, better stay over there. Let's see. Decks, right? The decks of that you're playing is meta, while the card pool, the cards you have access to, based off of ban lists and whatnot, that's the format. So that's just the way I look at it. Most people look at it different. And then there's, of course, the tier list concept, but that's for a different conversation. I'm not much for a tier list, because to me, it's more about the players, less of the decks. So the idea that there's a tier list of like, this is a tier 1 deck, this is a tier 2 deck, this is a tier 0 deck. It's like, I can agree with tier 0 as a concept of like a really, really good deck that anyone can use. Like, I can say like Dark Broly, before it got nerfed, right? I mean, still good now, but before it got nerfed, I could be like, oh, that's a tier 0 deck, because it's just the idea that it's generically good, it's simple. And that's the thing with the idea of meta, the term meta. For me, the way I refer to the term meta is, it just means popular deck. So it's the popular deck at the time in a certain format. It's the deck that a lot of people are used to, they like, and is easy. That's another thing. I always disagree with the idea of like, oh, meta decks are the best deck, period. they're made to be the best deck. And it's like, no, that's not true. The real truth is that they're popular, and what makes them popular is not that they're the best decks in the format or anything like that. No, it's the fact that they are the easiest deck to play in the format to get the results you want. And that's what I noticed. Players like things to be easy. They don't like things to be hard. So that's why the idea of like getting good, when you tell a player like, actually get good at the game instead of relying on these expensive cards and net deck and stuff like that. It's one of the issues we have with people who net deck is that idea is that they want things to be easy. They don't want to have to put in effort to be good at the game. Why learn how to build decks and get good at building decks when you can just go on the internet and copy somebody else's deck? Then it's the fact that they feel that they can benefit. I mean, they think they can get the same results if they copy. So it's like, well, if this person won a tournament with this deck, I could too, so let me copy it. Now, to a certain degree, there's some logic to it. Some, but not a lot, because of the fact that it's like, you might have copied the deck, but you are not that player. Not only that, you were never at that event that the player won, so you don't know what the matchups were like. You don't know the decisions they made. You don't know if a lot of the wins was because, one, their sideboard, or two, because the opponents play badly. A lot of misplays happened. A lot of luck. They lucked out more often than it was actually the deck capabilities. They just lucked out. Like, so many things to take into consideration. So you don't know if the deck is good until you start, playing it yourself. And that's why it's important to understand that regardless, a deck is useless without the player. A player is not useless without a deck. I mean, you can't play a game without a deck, but it's like a player can take any deck and do good if they're good. But the same can't be true in reverse, because a deck can't play by itself. It's just a stack of cards. And one of the annoying things I see a lot is the idea of thinking that, a deck is more important than a player. So then that's where cards and stuff like that become very important and very sought after by certain players, because they feel that these cards make a huge difference to the win ratio, when often than not it typically isn't. Like there was the thing with the whole ultimates. I already saw a problem with the ultimates being one copy per deck. I'm like, you already make most of these ultimates very expensive, like to play, but then you make it harder to get them to play. Like, what I mean expensive to play, the cost. You give them like really high cost, like 8, 10, 12, shit like that. So it makes it harder to cast them, right? You try to give them ways to cheat them out, which is nice, but you make them already costly already to play them, and then you limit them to one per deck. So the likelihood of being able to draw the card and then use it is largely restricted. Largely reduced. But it's understandable, you wanted to do something unique. You wanted to be able to have a slot where you could be like, here, we're going to make a really, really, really good card. But to make it fair and balanced, we're going to make it where you can only have one of it in your deck. And then it's supposed to be a wild card. That's the whole idea. It's supposed to be a wild card. It's supposed to add randomness to a game. That's the irony, right? We don't want the game to be random. As card game players, especially competitive players, we don't want the game to be random. See, as a casual player, yes, randomness makes sense. But as a competitive player, you don't want random. You want deliberate. You want to make sure that you win on the turn that you want to win. It shouldn't be up to chance. It shouldn't be up to a dice roll or a coin flip, right? It shouldn't be random that you won. That defeats the whole purpose of play testing, right? The whole purpose of even like building a deck and trying to make sure that it's balanced and finely tuned, and and has exactly what you need, for matchups and stuff like that, right? For the metas, for the other decks in the game, in the format. You want to make sure your deck functions the way you want it to function. You don't want it to just randomly do shit, right? So that's why, the idea of like being able to, hopefully Bandai does that, create cards that help you get your ultimate, to help you like, oh, if you meet these conditions, you can go search out your ultimate, right? You play this 2-drop, and this 2-drop lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, to try to grab your ultimate, right? It could literally just say the name of the ultimate, like look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and if baby handshake is in there, add it to your hand type shit, right? Something similar to that. Or look at the top 5 or 7, if we want to make it a little bit easier but still have a little bit of randomness to it, then you could do all right, look at the top 7, right? You have a higher chance of maybe being able to add it, or just make it flat out where if this card is face up on the field and you awaken your leader on your opponent's turn, then you can add maybe Hatchak from your deck to your hand, as an example, obviously. And then one of the things that this does is that allows you to build your deck around Zeno or maybe Hatchak or whatever, right? It lets you be deliberate about what you're doing, as opposed to it being random. Because as a competitive player, you don't want things to be random. That is your worst enemy. As a competitive player, your goal is to reduce randomness, not to increase it. Which is why I always hate the idea of like people adding cards to their decks that actually add more randomness to their decks. Not only add more randomness, also slows down the gameplay. Like they'll literally play cards that says search the top cards, do this, add this card to the bottom of your deck, and do this and that, and anything that just causes you to do extra stuff other than just draw a card, or just do damage, or just play another card, or burst or mill. Like it's like you wanna reduce the activity and the actions of the things you do. You don't want to take forever to do the things you do. The faster you get from point A to point B, the better. Especially, when competitive play, there's a timer. There's time that you have per round. And as a respectable player, you shouldn't be trying to waste as much time as possible. It is unfortunate there's people out there. I'm not going to get into the dark side of card game playing, but you get my point. It's like, it is very unfortunate that people have gotten away from, the idea of being unique and different. Because one of the, I'm trying to sell the idea of being unique and different is the idea of it gives you an advantage. When everybody is playing the same thing and everybody's doing the same thing, things become predictable, monotonous, boring. Everybody's gonna have, get their hands on certain cards, and they're gonna use those cards to try to beat certain matchups, because that's the meta, right? Everybody's playing specific decks and cards. It just makes it that much easier to beat those decks. We have specific cards designed for using against those decks. For example, if everybody's using Soul Striker, the Soul Striker leader, certain cards are very popular against that leader that literally shuts that leader down with all the energy untapping, which will, ruin the deck's, capabilities. Now, you doing that to your opponent who's playing Soul Striker, that's great, right? You enjoy that, you appreciate that, shutting down their leader's ability to spam. But as a Soul Striker player, you hate that, right? You hate your deck not being able to function the way you build it to function. And you don't want your opponent to have the ability to shut you down, the ability to control your deck and how your deck functions. You built your deck to do something for a reason. You don't want your opponent to take that ability away, right? So that's why being unique and different and playing different things, trying different leaders. Sometimes some leaders are similar. Like if I'm right, there's like 1 or 2 leaders out there that's similar to Soul Striker. There's a Trunks leader out there from my like Kid Trunk or something, and he's similar to Soul Striker. So trying that leader out and giving that leader a shot, a chance, is important. There's certain leaders out there that are good defensive, that they're similar in ways to Hatch, Yak, and Bulma, stuff like that. Like the yellow Jiren leader, as long as you have a Universe 11 battle card, you can crit a life, I think it is. It's either crit a life or add the life to your hand, one of the two. I think it is crit. And for the rest of the turn, your leader doesn't take damage, right? Then you got, this Zamasu leader, which is the offensive leader. It turns your deck into your life. But you get the idea. At least you get to stay in the game a little bit longer than you normally would. So since there's multiple leaders out there that are defensive, and most of them are in similar colors, you can pick up those extra leaders that have similar effects to the leader you already use, and then you have extra options. So in case you want to change things up, instead of playing Soul Striker, you could play that Trunks I was talking about, and that would throw people off. Somebody will see, sit in front of you in a duel, in a tournament or something, and they'll see the leader. I'm like, oh, okay, that's different. And then when they play, they'll realize, oh shit, that's like Soul Striker. Exactly, it is like Soul Striker. Not exactly the same, but it is like Soul Striker, and that was the whole point. I didn't want you to be like, oh, Soul Striker, I know what I'm going to side against that leader, right? Because, it's predictable, right? Soul Striker is predictable. So it makes no sense to play something that's predictable. You want to play something that's not too predictable. Ironically, Set 2 Zamasu surprises a lot of people, because a lot of people don't know about Set 2 Zamasu. So they see him and be like, okay, no biggie. He's a basic looking leader, nothing special about him. But then once he flips over, it's like, oh, that's what he does? And then they realize that the game is going to be a lot harder, because now the game turns from them dealing damage to them trying to mill you out. Technically, the milling out is through damage, but you get the point. But if they have card effects in their deck to help them mill, then that just adds to their ability to deck you out. Especially if I had my Zamasu deck and I went up against a cooler mill deck, so that was fun. So clearly, once I was awakened, I was in their ballpark, as it were. So their strategy is mainly to mill me out. So they focus on trying to mill me out as much as possible. But you get the idea. Not every deck can do that, right? But that's the point of trying things differently, trying different stuff. For example, something you can do is there's some cards that are generic, like you could just splash them in. Like, for example, what's his name? The Sin Shenron Negative Energy. He has an ability to mill with his Spirit Boost ability. And then there's the Cooler, the 5-drop Cooler, that when you play him, your opponent mills the card. So you could tech those 2 cards into a deck, and then now you added mill effects. Oh, and of course Oceanus Negative Energy Explosion. She also has the ability to help you mill your opponent. They'll mill 4 cards every time they attack on the turn in which you play her. So if you have all 3 of those in the same deck, then you just incorporated mill into your deck, which can come in handy. Oh, another thing you could do, especially if you could play blue, is play the Janemba Wicked, I think Agent of Destruction or something like that, Unison, right? That has the ability to mill. So then if you consider those 4 cards and try to put all 4 those cards into a deck, like a red-blue deck, then now you have mill in your deck, even if your deck is like largely aggro or like aggro control or something, where you have some counter plays like Gas-Sealing Trunks and stuff like that, right? Some counter plays here and there, some Champas for double strike, so you make a nice little red blue with a little splash of black deck, and now you have some mill effects, you have some aggro, so obviously you can aggro your opponent down and win that way, or you can just mill them out through the mill effects. And the mill effects definitely add control. It's not just mill your opponent out for game, but it's the fact that you can just mill your opponent, which can drastically reduce the possibility of them getting their ultimate, since they only have one copy in the deck. They might lose a couple important combo pieces if they have a Union Absorb deck or something, or like a deck where they have battle cards that Patara Fusion and stuff like that, or fusion of cards, and you send them to the drop. You're making it hard for them to get those pieces that they need to, play out some of their decks' main strategies. Maybe even mill some of their burn cards, so that way they can't use it to burn you for game. So that's why it's like just thinking outside the box, right? Being unique. It's like, yes, I might be playing, what example could I be? Okay, let's say King Piccolo, right? That's a popular deck right now. King Piccolo. But you incorporate some red and blue you incorporate some blue in there, right? And put in some mill stuff in there, and then now, you're throwing your opponent off, because it's like, wait, I thought this was a King Piccolo deck. But then now they realize that it's a red, blue, mill King Piccolo deck. So now that's totally different. Everybody else who's playing King Piccolo ain't playing mill strategy. They don't have mill effects on their deck. They don't have red and blue mixed in their deck. So they don't have stuff like Senzu and stuff like that. But you would, because you are playing blue. So being different gives you more power than just being the same. And the problem is that so many people are trying to be the same, thinking that they'll get the same results if they're the same. Oh, if I wear Michael Jordan's, uniform and shoes, that makes me Michael Jordan. And in reality, it's like, no, it doesn't. That's the idea of delusion. That's the definition of the term delusional. It's literally thinking you're the same as someone else when you're not. It's like, no, you can look up to somebody, you can be inspired by somebody, and you can try to be similar. You can try to be your own version of that person, but you're never going to actually be that person, right? And what sparked up the idea of this podcast was the idea that there's like a lot of players. Well, I'm assuming they're players, but the people who tend to say negative things to me about my decks and stuff, it's just the idea that there's like, because they can't do what I can do, then I must be wrong, right? The idea that I'm doing something wrong, because I uploaded a deck profile and I noticed that it got, a considerable amount of dislikes, and it's like, okay, that's strange. Why are you going to dislike this deck? And this is the Goku, or Dripku, as some people like to call it, the Dripku Unison deck. And it's like, okay, I made an aggro variant. Technically, it's obviously supposed to be aggro. That's what they want you to do with the deck, is essentially play a whole bunch of one-drop unisons and swing, and go aggro with a whole bunch of unisons, right? And I have a really nice build, really good build. But what's ironic is the fact that there's some people who click the dislike button. It's like, okay, what is it that you dislike specifically? I would like to know what is the issue, especially if it's something that I could fix, right? If there's something I can improve upon, or maybe there's just a misunderstanding, right? Maybe you don't understand how the deck works. Maybe you want some gameplay, like you would like to see the deck in action so you can better understand it. That is fine. Then ask. It makes no sense just to click the dislike button and then just walk off, right? And then not say anything. It's like, if the problem is that you don't believe the deck is good because you didn't see it in action, then just say so. right? Say that you would like to see it in action, so before you judge it. The problem is too many people want to judge things. It's like, oh man, this list is not the same as somebody else's list, therefore I have a problem with it. Because I know it's Eggman, he posted like 2 lists for the leader, and ironically, while I was building my version, I noticed that we had a lot of the same types of cards, but I kept tweaking. I started testing out the deck, and then the deck drastically changed, but it's a lot similar to what I originally had, and ironically it was a lot similar to Eggman's version. Shit happens, right? But it was just, the fact is, like, well, I put in the time and effort to fine tune the way I want the deck to play out, and that's what changed it. That's what changed the deck. Because the original build on paper, just by looking at it, wasn't bad. It was good. It had a lot of options, a lot of things you could do. I did have a counterplay in the deck, but it's like, yeah, but that's not really my style. I'm not really much of a counterplay type player. That's just adding extra steps to the game that I don't want. I like to simplify things and make things simpler and smaller. Also, there was less combo power in that build, and it's like, okay, I would like to incorporate the endless combo engine, so that way there is combo capabilities without actually comboing, right? Because I don't want to give up good, useful cards just to try to prevent damage, when I could just use the 4-star balls in the Goku Adventure Begins and just use that engine over and over again. So then I just tweaked it a little bit more, incorporate that engine, so that takes care of the combo aspect of the deck, or the lack of. And then I originally had the Krillin super combo. I was giving that a try because I noticed there was something about unisons on the card effect. I didn't fully read it, but I just noticed that there was something unison related for it. So I was like, oh, this might have synergy. So I grabbed a lot of stuff that's like has synergy with yellow unisons. But then, from messing around with the deck, I just started scrapping some of that stuff and realized, like, yeah, I like the new Cell super combo. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to go really aggro with the deck, but not too aggro. I don't want to put too many things, because there's no guarantee I would draw all those cards turn 1 to get the most out of it. So it's like the best I could do is one unison, one of the 1-drop unisons in my hand, preferably the Piccolo unison, which turns out to be my favorite one. So the Piccolo unison along with the Cell super combo. So that's what I will want in my opening hand, from the playtesting I was doing. So I will want that in my opening hand, and I can output about if I have two Cell super combos, I could output 4 damage. So the more copies of the Cell super combos, the more damage I could potentially do turn 1. So if I have 2 cells and one of the unisons, and then when I use my leader's effect and it procs off and it does drop a 1-drop unison, then I can definitely go in on 3 to 4 damage. So 3 to 4 damage turn 1 ain't that bad. I originally did try to have Chomp in there because of all the 1 energy strategy in the deck. I would try to keep the energy cost low, try to keep it at a maximum 3 energy. So I have a 3 energy boss monster, which is an 8 cost, but I use 3 energy to play it as long as I have a unison. And then Oceanus is a 2-drop, obviously on your opponent's turn. It's a 2-drop card, and then everything else is essentially 1 energy. There is the 3-drop unison, so I try to keep the number cost of the cards 3 or less. If I'm right, the highest cost in the deck is the highest cost that you'll actually be paying energy for at the highest cost is the Mecha Kobora. So Mecha Kobora is 4-drop essentially, 4-drop minimum. but everything else in there is relatively cheap. I'm trying to remember. Oh no, there's one more card in there. It's the 4-drop Ultimate, the Super Mirror. So I have 5 cards in there that cost 4 energy at most, or I mean at the least. Well, everything else is 3 or less. A lot of 1-drops, obviously. So 1-drop spam basically. So try to keep it nice and simple. Try to make it where, you could always play 1 or 2 cards a turn, especially after turn 2. You always want to keep 1 energy up, because I do have Flying Nimbus. So I want to keep 1 energy up for the Flying Nimbus. 2 energy up preferably. So Oceanus. If you have 3 energy, then that's Oceanus and Flying Nimbus. So you want to be able to combine those 2 and further protect yourself for a turn. What else? Yeah, it's fun. The deck's fun. The deck is definitely really nice. It definitely allows me to, flex with the multiple unisons, the 12 plus unisons that I have in the deck. I'm trying to remember how many unisons I got. 21. I got 21 unisons in the deck. Originally it was 25, so I was able to cut it down to 21. So I got 21 unisons in the deck. That's almost half the deck, and it works. It works just fine. It works the way I want it to, so that's the most important part. It works. It does a good amount of damage early game, and it does some really good stuff late game. And it's just up to you as a player to. All right. But being unique is has its benefits. It's sad that in this current day in the world, no one wants to be unique. And ironically, the ones who want to be unique, they're going about it the wrong way. But that's for a different conversation, and definitely a different podcast. But when it comes to the card game, being different, being unique, trying things differently matters. Sometimes playing that they always hate is that people always have this idea of like, oh no, you gotta play the best cards. You gotta play this card. This card's the best. But there's other cards similar to that card that, yes, is weaker in comparison, but it's just as good. Why not use it? But too many people got this mindset of like, nah, just as good is not good enough. You gotta have the best, the very best, perfection. There's no such thing, right? So it's just the idea that it's like, give other cards a chance, give other cards an option. See, I remember when Baby Hatchjack was first announced, and how many people hated that card and thought it was trash. Well, they were wrong, obviously. I wasn't one of those people who had a problem with the card. I saw that the card was awesome. Then Pan Super Combo, or not Super Combo, SCR. How the Time Maiden, how they had how people were complaining about that. And it's like, but it's a generic Hatchjack. Now everybody can have a Hatchjack. For all those who are like complaining that blue has Hatchjack and all the other colors don't. Now every other color does. Now that we have a generic Hatchjack. And what's extra awesome about this Ultimate is that it's a generic 4,000. It's a 4,000 you could potentially play for free, or at least for very, very cheap, and that's awesome. Like, I'm a fan. I obviously can't wait to get me one. And it was just so crazy to see that how quick people were to hate him. Like, but it's what a lot of y'all were complaining about before. A lot of y'all complained that Hatchjack, is in blue. Now we have a generic Hatchjack, but then you're not grateful for it. But oh well. That just lets you know that not everybody knows what they should know. And that's the unfortunate thing. Like, some people will look at my decks and be like, I don't think this deck works. Okay, you think it doesn't work, but you don't know that it doesn't work because you haven't tried it yet. And there's actually ways to try it and to test it and confirm it. But some people want to be so lazy, right? That's part of the whole, issue with the whole not being unique. People want to be lazy. People want things to be easy. So that's why they ignore unique, because unique requires effort and work. People want the easy route, so they'll expect me to show them the deck works when it should be obvious. Because here's the thing for me, right? Which is so funny, right? Is that I always give, players the benefit of the doubt. Always assume that anybody who sees, my list, or if they hear me talking about the game or something like that they're skillful enough to be able to understand. Like, they could look at my list and see what I'm trying to do with it, see the potential, right? But most people can't see the potential. They'll literally look at my list and be like, oh, this deck is terrible. This deck doesn't work. This deck can't do nothing. It's like, are you really looking at the list? It doesn't seem like you're looking at the list. It looks like you have your eyes closed, and then you're basing your opinion based off the fact that you have your eyes closed, that you can't see the truth because you're literally not looking at the list. It's like if you actually was good at the game, you would be able to look at the list and know that the list is good because of your experience, because of your skill level. So whenever somebody has something negative to say about my list that ain't legit, like if somebody can legitly point out like, oh, I noticed there's a problem. Yes, your deck can do this, that, and third, but I noticed that, at a certain point, if you don't draw specific cards, the deck, will fall apart. It'll be vulnerable, this, that, and third. Like, if somebody can really point it out, and I'm like, oh, damn, you're right. There is some weaknesses. There is some flaws in the deck. That's the thing. It's rare for me for anyone to point out the weaknesses. Like, I would like to know if one of my decks, has a weakness, has a flaw that I could, easily fix if I knew it was there, right? But most people can't point that out. Ironically, I've uploaded deck profiles which were really good at the time, and they played well. But then, like a week or two later, I look back at the list and I'm like, damn, there's actually some weaknesses in that list. As in, like, compared to how I would build the list now, because, I have some newer ideas, and the way I play is always improving, and I'm always improving on a weekly basis. I'm like, you know what? Some of those cards are not necessary. I don't need, this and that, so I would literally tear down the concepts of my old decks, which is why a lot of times you'll see me rebuild the deck, where it's like, oh, this is such and such, deck. And it's like, wait, isn't that the same, Hatchiac build as the last time? It's like, yeah, this is a upgraded version of it, because the other version was good for what it was, but I came up with a better build, so I'm able to improve it. The rare thing is that most people can't, do that. Can't do that for me. As in, like, people can't look at my, they can't do the same for me. Like, they can't look at my list and be like, you know what, this deck has potential, but I do notice some issues it has, and it could be greatly improved if you do this and third. Like being able to recommend a low cost equivalent to a card. Let's say I have a 4-drop that does certain things, and then somebody can point out like, hey, there's a 3-drop that does pretty much the same thing. And then I look into it and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. That 3-drop is a lot like this card. And since I only really need these particular effects, this 3-drop is a better option, because that saves me in energy. That means on turn 4, I can play the 3-drop and still have 1 energy up for a Champa or a negate, or even activating the effect of a card, by paying 1 energy. So that's always good, finding things that are similar to other cards that have lower costs, has its benefits. So I'm always looking for cards like that. I'm always looking for cards that are similar to cards that I already use, and be like, all right, cool, this is similar to what I already use, so this, can easily replace that. So it's one of the things that I do, and that's what allows my decks to stay fresh, unique, right? Different, because even I get bored after a while of like playing the same stuff over and over again. And it's like, yeah, I want to spice things up. I want to change things up. And I try different things. That's also part of why I evolved my play style, by trying to eliminate something, right? The whole idea of super combos, right, was one of the first things. Then later on, the whole idea of just comboing, period. And then the idea of just like the first 2 turns trying to do the most amount of damage as possible. And then the whole four damage is the first 4 damage is the easiest, next 2 requires a little effort, the last 2 being the hardest, that type of strategy. And then of course I'm trying to evolve it to the first 4 being the easiest. All I have to do is focus on being able to do 4 damage all at once in one shot. So I'm definitely looking for anything that can help me do 4 damage on one shot, whether it be a combination of cards, maybe a specific card that specifically can do the 4 damage by itself, like my Super Saiyan Blue Gogeta Frenzied Burst, that 10 drop, where if I have 15 or more energy, I can active main, make my opponent take 4 cards from their life and put it at the bottom of their deck, essentially burning my opponent for 4. Right? So being able to play something like that and being able to ramp into it and be able to drop it and use it as my win con, it's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. Because right there, that puts less effort, right? Because I always say the first 4 is the easiest, so I'm already going to be able to do 4 damage with my deck easily. All I have to do is just focus on playing cards to just play that one card, just to drop that one card and triggers effect. Of course, I would want something better. I'm just pointing out that that's an option. There was a Super 17 green yellow with successor card that has a decent effect. It does essentially 4 damage. The only thing is that it doesn't do it. It doesn't do it when your opponent only has 4 life, right? So your opponent has to have 5 or more life in order for you to trigger the effect. But the most you can do is 4 damage. So that was an unfortunate thing. It's like, oh, that sucks. I wish I could. This just does 4 damage, right? So that way I could use this to finish out the game. But I'm always looking for things of that nature, There's what's his name? The Yamcha leader that on the Awaken side, he has the ability to do 1 damage when you do damage through an effect. So then all you need is something to do 2 damage or burns for 2 damage, right? And then add that extra 1 damage, so that's 3 damage. So you could potentially do 3 damage. So if you could at least get your opponent down to 3 life with that leader, all you do is just play something that does 2 damage and trigger the leader's effect and bang, 3 damage game, right? The whole idea is always to just try to make the game simpler, easier. Your goal is to win, right? Is to get your opponent's life down to 0. So you should be mainly focusing on that and building your deck with that in mind. That should be top priority always over the whole bullshit of like, well, my opponent's playing Soul Striker, so I need these specific cards against that leader. My opponent's playing these cards, so I need cards specifically for those cards. And that whole game within the game basically is like, yeah, let's not play that game of trying to stop your opponent from playing the game. Let's play the game of winning. That's the game I like to play, the game of winning. Let's focus on winning. It's not focusing on just, focusing on instead of focusing on trying to stop your opponent from playing the game, focus on winning the game. That's the whole idea of like getting good. Because the irony is there'll definitely be a lot of people that would like to think they're good just because they stop their opponent from being, it's like, yeah, stop your win con. I was able to prevent you from, OTKing me with Cell or something. So, Cell Zeno. It's like, well, that's good. But you could have just had a strategy to beat me before I even got to play the card. Not just wait until I played it and then try to stop me, right, through some card effects. And sometimes I do hear people talk about like they have problems beating certain decks, they have problems winning, and a lot of it is because they're too busy focusing on trying to outplay their opponent, right? Outplay is like they're trying to figure out ways to beat their opponent's strategy instead of just trying to beat their opponent, instead of just trying to win the game, instead of improving their decks and making their deck strong. So that way their opponent will be the one struggling. That way their opponent will be the ones thinking like, damn, how am I going to beat this deck? This deck has, these amazing abilities. That's what you want to be. You want to be the person that everybody else is trying to beat, is trying to figure out what to do to their deck to give them a fighting chance against your deck. Not the other way around. You shouldn't be trying to figure out how to beat everybody else's deck with like card options like, I should play this one. I should play Black Mass Sane because it's good against this matchup and this, that. Like, you shouldn't be doing it. You should have a really strong deck that's focused on winning, that's consistent, right? It's finely tuned, right, to that goal. Just pumping out damage left and right and putting opponents in a position where they gotta step their game up. They gotta improve. Either make their deck stronger so they can compete against you, or try to find stuff that helps them beat your deck, right? So you always want to be, like, for me, I'd just rather be in that position. Instead of trying to figure out how to beat an opponent, I want to be the opponent that everybody else is trying to figure out how to beat. And that's the end of the podcast.